The morning Larkin watched the world end, she was drinking lukewarm coffee in a Portland safe house, listening to the emergency broadcast repeat the same useless information it had been cycling for 3 days. The power grid had failed in sections across the Pacific Northwest. Communications were sporadic. The infected outnumbered the living in every major city. She set down her chipped mug and looked at the 6 strangers who had become her entire world in 72 hours, knowing that survival would require more than luck or firepower. It would require something harder to find: genuine unity. The safe house was a converted warehouse in the industrial district, chosen by Torsten, a wiry engineer with oil-stained fingers and an uncanny ability to fortify anything. He had reinforced the doors with metal plating scavenged from a nearby construction site, rigged early warning systems using motion sensors and tripwires, and somehow coaxed the building's backup generator into giving them 4 hours of electricity per day. Larkin watched him now, tinkering with a radio transmitter, his brow furrowed in concentration. He rarely spoke unless he had something crucial to say, which made everyone listen when he did. Beside him sat Sable, a former trauma nurse whose gentle hands had already saved 2 lives in their group. She was cleaning medical supplies with methodical precision, organizing their meager resources into categories only she understood. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and though her eyes carried the weight of every patient she couldn't save before the hospitals collapsed, her voice remained steady and calm. She had become their emotional anchor without trying, the person everyone turned to when the nightmares got too vivid or the losses too heavy. Valeska stood at the reinforced window, her rifle resting against her shoulder with casual familiarity. She had been a competitive marksman before the outbreak, and that skill had translated seamlessly into survival. She was tall and lean, with pale blonde hair cut short and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. She spoke little, conserved energy, and never wasted ammunition. In 3 days, Larkin had seen her fire exactly 11 shots. All 11 had been headshots on the infected that came too close to their perimeter. Idris, a middle-aged man who had taught history at a community college, was attempting to maintain some sense of normalcy by reading aloud from a water-damaged novel he had found. His warm, professor's voice provided a strange comfort, a reminder that humanity had once created beauty instead of just fighting to survive another day. He had appointed himself the keeper of morale, telling stories, sharing memories, making sure they remained people instead of just survival machines. Kala, barely 17, sat cross-legged on a sleeping bag, sharpening a hunting knife with practiced strokes. She had shown up alone on their second day, half-starved and clever beyond her years. She knew the city better than any of them, knew which routes the infected favored and which buildings still had untapped supplies. Her youth should have made her vulnerable, but instead it made her fearless in ways that both inspired and terrified Larkin. Then there was Ephraim, the eldest among them at 71, a retired virologist who had worked for the CDC decades ago. His hands shook slightly from early-stage Parkinson's, but his mind remained sharp as surgical steel. He had been studying the infected whenever safely possible, taking notes in a leather journal, trying to understand the pattern of the outbreak. He believed answers existed if they looked hard enough, if they survived long enough to find them. Larkin stood and cleared her throat. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She had been a military strategist before her discharge, had planned operations and coordinated teams, but this was different. This was personal. These weren't soldiers following orders, they were frightened people choosing to trust her. "We need to talk about what comes next," she began, her voice carrying the authority she had learned to project. "Our supplies will last another week, maybe 10 days if we're careful. The infected are getting more active as the weather warms. Staying here isn't a long-term solution." Torsten looked up from his transmitter. "I've been picking up fragmentary broadcasts. There's talk of a military-controlled zone in the mountains, near the old Cascade Research Station. Could be propaganda, could be real." "How far?" Valeska asked, her first words that morning. 80 miles, rough terrain." The room fell silent as everyone calculated the impossibility of that distance through infected territory. The decision to move toward the mountains took 3 hours of debate, mapping, and quiet moments of individual fear that no one fully articulated. Larkin spread out a highway map on the concrete floor, its edges torn and stained with someone else's blood from some earlier catastrophe. Torsten marked locations with a pencil, creating a route that avoided major highways and population centers, threading through backroads and wilderness areas where the infected presence might be lighter. The challenge isn't just distance, Ephraim said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the map. It's sustainability. We'll need to resupply at least twice during the journey, find shelter each night, and move quietly enough to avoid attracting hordes. One mistake, one loud noise at the wrong moment, and we'll be swarmed. Sable set down her medical inventory list. I have enough supplies for minor injuries and infections, but nothing for major trauma. If someone gets seriously hurt en route, our options are extremely limited. She paused, meeting Larkin's eyes. We need to be realistic about what that means. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. If someone was badly injured, they might have to be left behind. The mathematics of survival were cruel and unforgiving. Kala traced a finger along the map's western edge. There's a sporting goods store here, about 20 miles out. Big place, off the main road. Might still have supplies, camping gear, food, weapons. I went there once with my dad. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, and Idris reached over to squeeze her shoulder gently. We'd need to scout it first, Valeska said. Never enter an unknown building without reconnaissance. That's how people die. Larkin nodded. Valeska's right. We'll split into teams. Torsten, can you get the van running? They had a delivery van in the warehouse bay, but its battery was dead and the fuel tank nearly empty. Already working on it, Torsten replied. I can siphon gas from the other vehicles in the lot. Battery might be trickier, but I've got a workaround in mind. Over the next 2 days, they prepared with the intensity of soldiers before deployment. Torsten got the van operational, reinforcing its sides with additional metal sheets and creating storage compartments for their supplies. Valeska conducted weapons training for those who needed it, teaching Idris and Kala proper gun safety and accuracy techniques. Sable organized medical supplies and gave everyone basic first aid instruction, walking them through how to handle cuts, burns, and potential bites. Ephraim continued his research, documenting everything he observed about the infected. They're more active at dusk and dawn, he reported during one evening briefing. Their visual acuity seems diminished in bright sunlight, but their hearing remains acute at all times. They're attracted to sound and movement more than anything else. And they're not mindless, they have rudimentary problem-solving capabilities. I've watched them test doors, work together to bring down barriers. So they're learning, Larkin said. Or remembering, Ephraim corrected. Some part of their human cognition persists, just redirected toward predatory purposes. The night before their departure, sleep came fitfully to everyone. Larkin found herself walking the perimeter at 2 in the morning, checking Torsten's alarm systems for the 3rd time, when Sable appeared beside her. Can't sleep either? Sable asked. Too much planning left to do in my head. You know you can't control everything that happens out there, right? Sable's voice was kind but firm. At some point, you have to trust the team and trust yourself. Larkin turned to face her. What if my decisions get someone killed? What if they don't? Sable countered. What if staying here gets us all killed instead? You're making the best choices you can with the information available. That's all any leader can do. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the infected moaning somewhere in the ruined city, a reminder that the world outside was patient and hungry and waiting. When dawn came, pale and cold, the 7 of them loaded into the van with their supplies packed tight. Torsten drove, with Valeska in the passenger seat, her rifle ready. Larkin, Sable, Idris, Kala, and Ephraim sat in the back among the bags and boxes that represented everything they owned. As Torsten started the engine and the warehouse door rolled open, Larkin took one last look at the space that had kept them safe. Then they rolled out into the infected world, committed to the journey ahead. The city streets were a graveyard of abandoned vehicles and shattered storefronts, glass glittering on asphalt like scattered stars. Torsten navigated carefully, weaving around obstacles, keeping the engine at a low rumble that wouldn't carry far. Everyone in the van remained silent, understanding that noise discipline started now. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the infected wandering aimlessly between buildings, their movements jerky and unnatural, bodies wearing the remnants of their previous lives, business suits, hospital scrubs, children's pajamas. Kala had her face pressed to the window, and Larkin noticed tears tracking silently down the girl's cheeks. The teenager was looking at a small infected child, maybe 8 years old, stumbling through a playground with broken swings creaking in the wind. Idris saw it too and gently pulled Kala away from the window, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Don't look," he whispered. "Remember them as they were, not as they are." It took 90 minutes to navigate out of the urban center, 90 minutes of held breath and pounding hearts and several close calls when infected turned toward the sound of their engine. Once, Torsten had to stop completely as a group of 30 or more shuffled across an intersection ahead. They sat frozen, engine idling nearly silent, watching the horde pass within 20 feet of their van. Valeska had her rifle trained on the nearest infected, finger resting beside the trigger, ready but controlled. When they finally reached the outskirts where buildings gave way to rural countryside, everyone released a collective exhale. The tension didn't disappear, it never would, but it shifted into something more manageable. "First checkpoint," Torsten announced quietly, pointing to a gas station ahead. "We need to top off the tank." The station was deserted, its windows intact but its door hanging open. Valeska and Larkin exited first, weapons ready, moving with tactical precision to clear the small building. Inside, they found evidence of looting, shelves knocked over, cash register smashed, but no infected and no bodies. Valeska gave the all-clear signal. While Torsten worked on accessing the underground fuel tanks with a manual pump he had brought, the others quickly gathered what remained on the shelves, a few bottles of water, some candy bars, a first aid kit that Sable immediately claimed. Ephraim found a road atlas more detailed than their current map and carefully added it to his satchel. Kala emerged from the storage room with a case of motor oil and a box of road flares. "These could be useful," she said. "Flares could work as distraction devices." Larkin smiled. "Good thinking. Load them up." They were back in the van within 12 minutes, a clean operation that gave Larkin hope they might actually make this work. But hope in the apocalypse was a dangerous commodity, and she knew better than to hold it too tightly. The sporting goods store appeared on the horizon just after noon, a large rectangular building with a faded sign and a parking lot full of abandoned cars. Torsten parked the van a quarter-mile away, hidden behind an overgrown hedge line. They would approach on foot, scout the location, and only commit to entry if it seemed safe. "Valeska, you're with me," Larkin said. "Torsten, you too. Everyone else stays with the van. If we're not back in 1 hour, or if you hear sustained gunfire, you leave. Don't wait, don't come looking. Just drive to the secondary meeting point we discussed." "Absolutely not," Sable said firmly. "We don't leave people behind. That's not who we are. It's who we have to be if we want to survive," Larkin replied, though the words tasted bitter. Idris shook his head. "Survival without humanity isn't survival. It's just existence. We wait. All of us. Together." Larkin looked around at their faces and saw the same stubborn determination reflected back. These weren't soldiers she could command. They were people who had chosen unity, and that choice meant something. "Fine," she conceded. "But stay alert and keep the engine running." The three of them moved toward the store using available cover, communicating through hand signals Larkin had taught them. The parking lot was eerily quiet, no movement visible through the store's large windows. Valeska took position near the entrance, covering while Larkin and Torsten approached the door. It was unlocked, which was either a very good or very bad sign. Inside, the store was dimmed by dust-covered skylights, creating a twilight atmosphere that played tricks on the eyes. The sporting goods store stretched before them in shadowy aisles, merchandise scattered but still abundant. Larkin's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, her weapon sweeping in controlled arcs as she checked corners and sight lines. The air smelled stale and musty, with an underlying copper scent that made her stomach tighten. Blood, somewhere, though she couldn't see any obvious signs of violence. Torsten moved to the camping section, his footsteps nearly silent despite the debris on the floor. He began selecting items with practiced efficiency: water filtration systems, compact sleeping bags, fire-starting kits. Valeska maintained her position at the entrance, covering their exit route while periodically scanning the parking lot through the glass doors. Larkin headed toward the hunting section, looking for ammunition and additional weapons. The gun cabinet had been smashed open, most firearms taken, but she found several boxes of bullets that matched their weapons and a compound bow with a quiver of arrows. The bow would be valuable. Silent kills meant avoiding attention from other infected in the area. She was reaching for a hunting knife when she heard it, a soft shuffling sound from the back storage area, the distinct drag-scrape pattern of infected movement. Her hand froze, then slowly moved to signal the others. Torsten saw immediately and stopped moving. Valeska shifted her stance, rifle coming up. The storage room door was partially open, darkness beyond, and the shuffling grew slightly louder. One infected, maybe two, drawn by the small sounds they had been making. Larkin had to make a decision: engage and risk noise that might attract more, or quietly retreat with what they had already gathered. She pointed to Torsten, then to the exit, mouthing the word, "Go." He nodded, carefully gathering his selected supplies. She motioned for Valeska to prepare to move. They would execute a silent retreat, leaving whatever was in that storage room undisturbed. But as Torsten took his first step toward the exit, his boot came down on a display sign that none of them had noticed in the shadows. The metal frame clattered against the floor, the sound explosively loud in the quiet store. The shuffling stopped. Then accelerated. 3 infected burst from the storage room, moving with that terrible speed that still shocked Larkin even after days of seeing it. These weren't the slow, shambling zombies from old movies. They were fast, aggressive, driven by hunger that had replaced every human instinct. Valeska's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. 2 infected dropped, perfect headshots even in low light. The third was on Torsten before anyone could react, slamming into him and driving him backward into a display of fishing rods. Larkin covered the distance in 4 long strides, bringing her knife up and driving it through the infected skull at the base of its neck, angling upward. The creature went limp immediately and she shoved it off Torsten, already checking him for bites. I'm okay," he gasped, his face pale. It didn't break skin, the jacket took it. Sure enough, his heavy canvas jacket showed teeth marks but the skin beneath was unbroken. Larkin felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost painful. "We move, now," Valeska said urgently. "That gunfire will bring more." They grabbed what they could carry and ran for the exit. As they crossed the parking lot, Larkin saw movement in the tree line beyond, dozens of infected, maybe more, drawn by the sound of gunfire, converging on their location. "Van! Go, go, go," she shouted. Kala had already seen them coming and had the side door open. They piled in, Torsten diving into the driver's seat and gunning the engine. The van lurched forward just as the first wave of infected reached the parking lot, their reaching hands missing the rear bumper by inches. Torsten drove hard, pushing the van to speeds that were dangerous on the debris-littered roads, but necessary. Behind them, the infected gave chase for nearly a mile before finally losing interest, their figures receding in the side mirrors. When they finally slowed to a safer speed, everyone was breathing hard, adrenaline making hands shake. Sable immediately went to Torsten, checking him thoroughly despite his protests, making absolutely certain there were no injuries they had missed. That was too close, Idris said, his voice unsteady. We can't take risks like that again. Every supply run is a risk, Larkin replied. But you're right, we got sloppy. I should have cleared that storage room before allowing any movement. You couldn't have known, Ephraim said. We're all learning how to survive this in real time. There's no manual, no precedent. But there should be, Larkin thought. They should be learning from each encounter, building a genuine survival guide based on experience and tactics that worked. She pulled out a small notebook she had been carrying and began writing. Lesson 1: Always clear all rooms before gathering supplies. Never assume a space is empty. Lesson 2: Identify noise hazards before moving through an area. Lesson 3: Have multiple exit strategies, never rely on a single route. Sable looked over her shoulder and smiled sadly. Making a manual for the apocalypse? Someone should, Larkin said. If we survive this, if others are out there trying to do the same, they need to know what we're learning. They found shelter that night in an abandoned farm, a sturdy 2-story house set back from the road with clear sight lines in all directions. Torsten and Valeska cleared it room by room while the others waited in the van, weapons ready. When the all-clear came, they unloaded quickly, bringing supplies inside and immediately setting up their security protocols. Torsten rigged the doors with early warning systems using fishing line and empty cans from the farmhouse kitchen. Valeska took first watch position in the upstairs bedroom with the best vantage point. Sable organized a corner of the living room into a medical station, restocking her supplies from the first aid kit they had found. Kala and Idris worked together to inventory their food, calculating rations. Ephraim sat at the farmhouse table, his leather journal open before him, adding to his observations. I've been thinking about what happened today, he said to Larkin, who was updating her tactical notes. The infected that attacked us were faster, more aggressive than the ones we've seen wandering the streets. I wonder if there are stages to the infection, or if certain individuals retain more physical capability than others. Does it matter? Larkin asked, not unkindly. Either way, they want to kill us. It matters if we want to predict behavior, identify threats, understand what we're facing. Knowledge is survival. He tapped his journal. Everything I document could be valuable, if not for us, then for whoever comes after. Larkin thought about her own notes, the tactical guide she was building. You really think there's going to be an after? That humanity has a chance? Ephraim was quiet for a moment. I think we have to believe there is, or we've already lost the only thing that makes us different from them: hope, purpose, the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. That night, they ate a cold meal of canned soup and crackers, conserving their fuel for emergencies. Idris entertained them with stories from his teaching days, making Kala laugh with impressions of his former students. It was a brief respite from fear, a reminder that they were more than just survival units. But when Larkin took her turn at watch around midnight, the weight of responsibility settled heavy on her shoulders. From her position upstairs, she could see the dark landscape stretching endlessly, could hear the occasional distant moan of infected somewhere in the night. 7 lives depending on her decisions, her tactical choices, her ability to lead them through terrain both physical and emotional. Sable appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of precious coffee they had found in the farmhouse pantry. Thought you could use this, she said, settling in beside Larkin. You should be sleeping. So should you, eventually. Sable sipped her coffee, staring out into the darkness. Can I ask you something? Why did you leave the military? Larkin was silent for a long moment. I made a call that got people killed. Not through incompetence or cowardice, I made the right tactical decision with the information I had. But people still died because of my orders. After that, I couldn't. She trailed off. And now you're leading again. Now I don't have a choice. None of us do. There's always a choice, Sable said gently. You chose to take responsibility for these people. That's not a small thing. That's everything. They sat together in companionable silence until Sable's watch rotation came, then Larkin made her way to a sleeping bag on the living room floor, squeezed between Kala and Idris. As she drifted toward uneasy sleep, she heard Ephraim in the corner, still writing by candlelight, documenting everything for a future that might never come. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of movement and shelter, supply gathering and near misses. They learned to read the patterns of infected movement, to identify which buildings were likely to be safe and which were death traps. Larkin's tactical notes grew more detailed. Ephraim's observations became more sophisticated. The team began to function with the fluid coordination of people who trusted each other implicitly. On the 4th day, they reached the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The elevation change was subtle at first, then more pronounced, the air growing cooler and cleaner. According to Torsten's calculations, they were roughly 40 miles from the research station where the supposed safe zone existed. But the terrain ahead was challenging: narrow roads, dense forest, limited visibility. Perfect ambush territory for infected hordes, and difficult driving conditions that could strand them easily. We need to make a decision, Larkin said as they studied the map during a brief stop. We can try to push through in the van, which is faster but riskier if we break down or get blocked. Or we cache the van and continue on foot, which is slower but gives us more options. On foot through 40 miles of wilderness with all our supplies? Idris looked doubtful. That's days of exposure, days of vulnerability. Valeska traced a finger along the map. There's a logging road here that parallels the highway but stays in the tree cover. Less likely to have infected, less chance of vehicle blockages. We could try that route. They voted, the democracy they had developed over days of survival. 4 votes for the logging road in the van, 3 for continuing on foot. The decision was made. The logging road proved to be both blessing and curse, rough enough to slow their progress significantly, but clear enough to remain passable. The van's suspension groaned in protest as Torsten navigated ruts and rocks, trees pressing close on both sides, branches scraping against the metal reinforcement. Progress was measured in miles per hour rather than tens of miles, but they were moving deeper into the mountains, farther from the densely infected urban zones. They had been on the logging road for 6 hours when the van lurched violently and something underneath made a sound like a gunshot. Torsten fought the wheel, managing to bring them to a controlled stop before the vehicle died completely. Axel, he said grimly, already climbing out to assess the damage. Snapped clean through. We're not driving anywhere. The finality of it settled over them like a heavy blanket. They were 30 miles from the research station, deep in forest territory, with no vehicle and all their supplies to carry. Larkin felt every eye turn to her, waiting for the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. We cache everything non-essential, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. We take only what we can carry: weapons, medical supplies, food and water for 5 days, basic shelter equipment. We move on foot, we move carefully, and we survive. It took 2 hours to reorganize, to make the brutal decisions about what stayed and what went. Ephraim insisted on keeping his journal despite its weight. Sable refused to leave behind her medical supplies. Kala found a backpack and filled it with survival essentials, her face set in determined lines. When they finally set off into the forest, the 7 of them looked like refugees from a war zone, which, Larkin supposed, was exactly what they were. The terrain was difficult, steep slopes and dense undergrowth, but at least the infected presence was minimal. The few they encountered were solitary, easier to avoid or dispatch quietly with Valeska's bow or Larkin's knife. That first night on foot, they made camp in a small clearing, rotating watch in 2-hour shifts. Larkin updated her tactical guide by firelight, adding new lessons. Lesson 15, always have a backup plan for transportation failure. Lesson 16, regular vehicle maintenance isn't optional, inspect critical systems daily. Lesson 17, Physical Conditioning Matters. A group is only as fast as its slowest member. She glanced at Ephraim, who was breathing heavily from the day's hike despite his best efforts to hide it. His Parkinson's tremors seemed worse, exhaustion exacerbating the condition. They would need to adjust their pace, which meant more days exposed in the wilderness. On the second day, Idris spotted something through the trees, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance, too controlled to be a forest fire. Signs of human habitation, possibly the research station, possibly something else. Could be survivors, Kala said hopefully. Could be a trap, Valeska countered. Smoke means fire, fire means people, people mean unpredictability. The infected are dangerous, but desperate humans can be worse. We have to at least investigate, Sable argued. If there's a community, a safe place, we can't just walk past it. They approached cautiously, Valeska scouting ahead, the rest following at a distance. What they found was a small camp, 6 people, 3 tents, a cooking fire. As they watched from concealment, Larkin assessed them, tired, scared, probably low on supplies, but organized enough to maintain a secure perimeter. She made the decision to make contact. They stepped out into the open, hands visible and non-threatening. The camp's reaction was immediate, weapons drawn, shouted warnings to stay back. "We're not infected," Larkin called out. "We're heading to the research station in the mountains. We don't want trouble, just wondered if you had information to share." A woman stepped forward, older, with gray hair and a shotgun held with comfortable familiarity. "Research station's real," she said. "We came from there. Left 3 days ago." "Why did you leave a safe zone?" Idris asked. The woman's expression darkened. "Because safe is relative. They've got walls, got supplies, got military personnel running things. They've also got strict rules about who gets in. Rationing. Conscription. They wanted our teenager to join their patrol teams, wanted my husband for labor details. We decided to take our chances out here." The information settled like a stone in Larkin's stomach. "So it's not exactly a refuge. It's survival," the woman said. "Just a different kind. You'll have to decide if it's the kind you can live with." They shared information for another hour, safe routes, infected movement patterns, resources. The woman's group was heading west, hoping to reach the coast where they heard island communities might be safer. Larkin and her team were continuing to the research station, despite the warning, because 30 miles in the wilderness without shelter was a death sentence for Ephraim. They parted with cautious well wishes, 2 groups of survivors pursuing different theories of continued existence. The research station appeared through morning mist on the 7th day of their journey, a compound of concrete buildings surrounded by 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Guard towers occupied 2 corners, and Larkin could see armed personnel patrolling the perimeter. It looked exactly like what it was, a military installation adapted for survival, prioritizing security over comfort, order over freedom. They approached slowly, hands raised, weapons slung but visible. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, "Stop where you are. Submit to inspection and quarantine protocols." The process took hours. They were separated, examined for bites and infection, questioned about their journey and skills. Larkin watched her team being led in different directions and felt the unity they had built beginning to fracture under institutional procedures. This wasn't what they had fought so hard to reach. She was interviewed by a colonel named Drexler, a hard-faced man who viewed everything through a tactical lens she recognized because she had once shared it. He reviewed her military background with approval, noted her leadership of the group, and made his offer. "We need people like you, Larkin. Strategists, leaders, people who can make hard decisions. You'd be valuable here in command structure. As for your people, the medic, the engineer, they're useful. The marksman too. The others." He shrugged. "We'll find work for them. We stay together, Larkin said immediately. That's not how this works. We have a hierarchy, assignments based on capability. Your teenager would join the youth training program. The old man. Drexler consulted his notes. Ephraim. He's a liability, consuming resources without significant contribution. We have protocols for that. The casual cruelty of it ignited something in Larkin's chest. They had survived hordes of infected, navigated impossible terrain, built something genuine in the ruins of the world. She wouldn't let it be dismantled by bureaucratic efficiency. That night, Larkin found her team housed in separate barracks. She moved through the compound quietly, gathering them one by one. When all 7 were assembled in a storage building, she laid out the situation. We can stay here. Accept their structure, their rules. We'll be safe, probably, but we won't be together. Won't be who we are. What's the alternative? Idris asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. We leave. We find another way. There are coastal communities, island settlements, maybe other groups like us who chose unity over security. She pulled out her notebook, now filled with tactical lessons and survival strategies. We have knowledge now. We know how to survive out there. We could help others do the same. That's insane, Sable said, but she was smiling. Absolutely insane. Leaving a fortified position to wander the infected wilderness teaching survival tactics. I'm in, Valeska said simply. Me too, Kala added. These people look at me like I'm just a kid. You all treat me like I'm part of the team. One by one, they agreed. Even Ephraim, who would have been most justified in choosing safety, nodded firmly. I didn't document all this just to sit behind walls. If we're building a guide to surviving the apocalypse, we need to actually live it. They left before dawn, slipping past patrols that were focused outward on infected threats, not inward on people leaving supposed safety. As they disappeared into the forest, Larkin took one look back at the research station, its lights bright against the darkness, then turned toward the unknown with her team around her. The world was still broken, still filled with the infected and danger and countless ways to die. But they had something more valuable than walls and weapons. They had unity forged in fire, tactics learned through survival, and the stubborn human belief that tomorrow might be better if they fought to make it so. Weeks later, they would find others, small groups struggling to survive, and they would share what they had learned. Larkin's tactical guide would be copied and passed along, a growing manual for the apocalypse. Ephraim's observations would help communities understand and predict infected behavior. They became teachers and guides, moving between survivor groups, never staying long, always risking the infected zones to spread knowledge. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Larkin wondered if they would have been safer behind the research station walls. Then she would look at her team, Sable tending to a survivor's wounds, Torsten teaching someone to fortify a building, Valeska training new shooters, Idris maintaining morale with stories, Kala proving that youth wasn't weakness, Ephraim documenting everything for future generations, and she knew they had made the right choice. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying human. It was about unity, tactics, and the refusal to let the apocalypse steal who they were. The end was still uncertain, the future still terrifying. But they would face it together, 7 people who had become something more than the sum of their individual survival. They had become hope, walking wounded through a broken world, proving that humanity's best weapon wasn't violence or walls. It was each other. And somewhere, in a secure location they changed regularly, Larkin kept her notebook, adding new lessons every day.